Hey everybody, so I'm here with Zach Elliott, and we are going to do something fun. We're going to go through the ACLU recent tweet thread that everybody saw about myths about biological sex and sort of debunk it claim by claim with Zach here, who's extremely knowledgeable on the differences between the sexes. So if you want to see my full interview with Zach, that will be coming out on Friday of this week. I wanted to get this out first. So, Zach, are you ready to delve in? And how are you feeling about this
Yeah,
ACLU thread?
I'm ready. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen. I guess just quickly before we start, what's your general view of the ACLU? I mean, I know for me, it's an organization that I used to be absolutely, full of admiration for and respect, and they've done so many good things for freedom of speech and whatnot. And then now it
I
just seems
totally agree. Yeah,
it's taken a turn.
and it's taken a huge turn. Yeah, they've taken a turn towards a very, I don't know, just the way they present this information is very similar to what we see just in social media generally with activists talking about sex. They don't provide any evidence to support their assertions at all. So it's
Yeah,
it's
right,
sad to see them go down a non-scientific route.
right,
Yeah.
right. And there are people who are sort of calling this the new science denialism and an era where we're faced with this new form of science denialism. Do you see it like that?
Yeah, I do too. I really do.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, it's we see a lot of institutions uh, pushing science denialism,
Mhm.
but they'll do it under the guise of science. They'll use the word science a lot, but not actually present a lot of evidence, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Well, that being said, let's get into this. So, ACLU, this is from February 3rd. And of course, it's in the context of these ongoing legal debates about sports teams. And in particular, if people don't know a little bit of context, there's a track team in Connecticut where trans girls, aka male students, are allowed to run on the girls' team, and they, of course, win. And so the girls are bringing a lawsuit. So the ACLU is fighting that, and a lot of other cases like that in other states. So let's just get right in. Tweet number 1. ACLU says attacks on trans youth in sports are showing up in dozens of state legislatures nationwide. These bans are discriminatory, harmful, and unscientific. Yeah, there it is. Here's why. Okay,
I
and
think
now they claim that they're going to be debunking 4 myths about trans people in
see
sports.
the way they frame it off the bat is a problem because uh, the issue is not necessarily no one, as far as I'm aware, wants to actually ban trans people from participating in competitive sport or sports in high school or anything like that. The specific argument is that biological males have a competitive advantage over females on a huge level, and that specifically biological males shouldn't be able to compete in the female category. So
Right,
right off the
that's
bat, yeah.
super important point there. Um, okay. Fact 1. Fact. The word fact here. I
Fact
feel a
one.
little uncomfortable saying it, but fact 1. Trans girls are girls. Myth. Sex is binary, apparent at birth, and identifiable through singular biological characteristics. There is no one way for our bodies to be. Women, including women who are transgender, intersex, or disabled, have a range of different physical characteristics. Biological sex and gender are not binaries. There are no set hormone ranges, body parts, or chromosomes that all people of a particular sex or gender have. Where do we even begin?
Yeah, where do we start? Okay, so I think it's important to break down just like the strategies that they're using in this argument. So the first thing is they're detaching, like implicit in this definition, they're detaching sex from reproductive role. So, reproductive role is how our bodies are organized to support sperm or to support ova. And that's the ultimate trait of what sex is. And so they're detaching sex from reproductive role. And then they say that that there's all these types of characteristics that define sex. Like they say that it cannot be identified through one singular biological characteristic. And that is an application of what's called the univariate fallacy. And the univariate fallacy basically is saying that because there is not one trait that always distinguishes two categories, that the categories must be social constructs. So, but the problem is it's a fallacy, because if you analyze multiple variables, the categories become objective. They're not social constructs. They're clearly defined. Now there's a sleight of hand here because they're detaching sex from reproductive role. They're able to say, oh, there is no single characteristic that defines sex. But as we know from evolutionary biology across species, the one trait that defines sex, that defines male and female, is gamete type, reproductive role. And so that is just completely ignored. Now, if we let's say we take their premise and detach sex from reproductive role and just look at characteristics. Even when we do that and we add all the characteristics together, we perform a multivariate analysis. Male and female are still clearly defined because 99.9% of births have chromosomes that match their reproductive system. So still, even if we detach reproductive role, sex is still clearly defined.
Right, and then
yeah.
Would it be correct to say that the sort of the leftover from after was 99.9? So the leftover tiny percentage would be people who sort of are exceptions that prove the rule. Is that fair to say?
They'd be variations within the dual system of sex. Yeah, that'd be fair to say. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what about this phrase, women, including women who are transgender? Do you have anything to say about that?
Women, including women who are transgender. So obviously, you can identify in any way internally. There's all types of. It's about subjective perception. So you can identify in any way you see fit. The problem is when your identification or expression starts to interfere or infringe upon the rights of others. And of course, women who are transgender would be their gender. In terms of the activist perspective, women would be the gender, and then sex would be biological male. And it's true that there is no way for our bodies to be in terms of the variation, but there's still only two categories, male and female. And transgender women are clear biological females. There is no overlap. There is almost no overlap between intersex and being transgender. And so there really is no reason to bring up intersex or disabled people or anything else, because this is about trans women.
Right. And you made a really good point in your book, in one of the early chapters, where you said, so there's this claim floating around that men can give birth. And, I've heard it, like I interviewed a birth worker, a doula, and she was trained that until she questioned it. But you made a really good point that is true linguistically. It's only true linguistically.
If you change the definition of man, it's true.
Right. So that's sort of what they're doing here, right? Women who, because I've noticed the ACLU has started saying they don't say trans women anymore. They say women who are trans.
Okay. Right. So they're doing this thing that we see a lot where you'll see them talk about women who are trans, or then they'll compare it, women who are black, women who are white. Like the adjective is the adjective of transgender is treated the same way as anything else, like black or white or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're conflating those two things, when in reality, black women are women because they're female, white women are women because they're female, but transgender women are biological males.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about this myth number 1?
So to end this one, sex is definitely binary on the level of reproductive mechanisms across the across most higher order species within the plant and animal kingdoms, there are only 2 reproductive roles. Now there's variations of body types within the 2 reproductive roles. So sex characteristics are not binary, and the diversity of sex characteristics are not binary. But sex itself on the level of category and reproductive role is binary.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fundamental aspect of life.
Right, right. So you could have women who are, and this you explained in our full interview really well, but so you could have women who are more masculine, right, in their appearance, and men who are more feminine in their appearance. But that doesn't indicate a spectrum. It's just, like you said, variation within the 2 binaries, right?
Right. So what they're doing is a category error. They're conflating sex characteristics with sex, or psychological traits with sex, when in reality the correct analysis is sex is binary on the level of reproductive role, and then below that is that variation within the 2 categories.
Yeah. Okay. So are we ready to go to myth number 2?
Yep. Already.
Yeah.
It'll be a long one.
Oh gosh. Okay. Fact 2. Trans athletes do not have an unfair advantage in sports. So I know you've written about this and you've talked about this. So here we go. Myth: trans athletes' physiological characteristics provide an unfair advantage over cis athletes. Trans athletes vary in athletic ability, just like cisgender athletes in many states. The very same cis girls who have claimed that trans athletes have an unfair advantage have consistently performed as well as or better than transgender competitors.
So yeah, so this one, when it talks about how the last sentence where it talks about how they have an unfair advantage, like some trans athletes have consistently performed as well as or better than transgender competitors. So here, they're making a point that variation exists between males and females, and within males and females, where some biological females can beat some biological males in competitive sports, which is true. However, males still maintain a competitive advantage over females even after testosterone is suppressed. And that's because what we're doing is we're not just taking regular males and regular females. We're taking narrow bands of athletes who are oftentimes have trained a lot. So we're taking the best from males and the best from females. And when we look at the average differences between males and females when it comes to sports performance, you can imagine it as 2 bell curves, a bell curve for males and a bell curve for females with some overlap. But the biggest difference is found on the tail ends of those bell curves, on the extremes. And that's where we're selecting from when we do competitive sports, is those extremes. We're selecting from the best females and the best males. And so what happens because of that, the fallout from that biological difference there, is things like 300 high school boys from track can beat the record of the fastest female runner in the world. 300 high school boys can beat the fastest female runner. And so I think this would be a good time to explain Dr. Emma Hilton and Tommy Lundberg's literature review on this very topic. I also did a video on it called Testosterone and Beyond, the Male Advantage in Sports. And what they do in this literature review is they break it down into 3 parts. They look at 1, the biological differences between males and females and how that relates to sports performance. 2, they look at the sports performance gap between males and females across different sports, like track, like weightlifting. And then the third thing is they look at 11 long-term studies of trans women, biological males, undergoing testosterone suppression to see how much that testosterone suppression affected their biological differences, the muscle mass, strength, things like that. So for part 1, in terms of biological differences, males have considerable differences when it comes to upper body strength, when it comes to tendon properties like they have much more force. They're able to respirate more efficiently. They're able to have more efficient cardiovascular function during intense exercise. They have an incredible sex difference in grip strength. And so those biological differences then impact sports performance, where around 10% of, or in track, males have a 10% advantage over females. In weightlifting, they have a 30% advantage over females. And so what happens is, on those extremes, on those tail ends of the bell curve, that 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's huge. That's why high school boys can oftentimes beat the most elite female athletes in track. So what Emma Hilton and Tommy Lundberg found in their literature review was that even after testosterone was suppressed, down to the IOC guidelines, down to the International Olympic Committee guidelines, after 1 to 2 years, the muscle mass strength changes were incredibly low, around 5%. And so that left about a 20 to 30% competitive advantage in most sports for biological males, even after undergoing testosterone suppression.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is good evidence as to why this statement by the ACLU is not true. They're bringing up some anecdotal evidence, but they're not bringing evidence on the level of statistics, which Emma Hilton and Tommy Lundberg do. So.
Okay, super important distinction there. And then even their anecdotal evidence, they've not sourced it. So they've made it difficult to find that, because they've said this very broad claim that in many states, the very same cis girls, da 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 da. So that's now hard to check out, because you don't know which state to look for. You know, I have read some of these cases. There was one track race in Connecticut where the trans student, who's a male who identifies as trans, did lose by a fraction of a second to one of the girls who's taking the lawsuit. So that's one case where, in the midst of this case that was going on, the one race had a different outcome, again, by a fraction of a second. So I'm not sure exactly what they're referencing there, but
Yep, it's reliant on anecdotal evidence instead of peer-reviewed studies and statistics.
Yeah, and zero sources in the
Zero sources. That was really, I was even shocked by that. I did not expect that. I thought they'd at least have sources.
Yeah, I do. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and check if they've got any sources on their site, because they have this almost same article on their website that I saw a while ago, and it's 4 myths about trans athletes debunked. So it looks like they do have more links here. So if people want to check it out further, they can go here. But look, okay, they're linking to themselves, linking to ABC News. ABC. Anyway, let's go back to the myths and facts. Check out that ratio, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they got piled on really, really bad.
Yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
All right, fact 3. Including trans athletes will benefit everyone. Myth: the participation of trans athletes hurts cis women. Excluding women who are trans hurts all women. It invites gender policing that could subject any woman to invasive tests or accusations of being too masculine or too good at their sport to be a real woman. Okay, I want to first just say something about this. So, first of all, I don't like how they're not specifying when they say trans athletes. They're not specifying which team or which sex, right? So it's unclear, actually.
Yeah, it's purposely vague.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And one of the cases that the ACLU is currently fighting is, I believe it's still current. I might have gotten that wrong and that it might be over now, but it's ironically called the Hecox case. But
oh yeah, I heard about that one. Yeah,
you know about that one. Okay,
just a little, but yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, there are male students on a female track team, the girls' track team, and the student who's a trans identified male, is named Lindsay Hecox, and And that student is one of two plaintiffs in the case who ACLU is, using to make this case. The other is an anonymous, quote unquote, cisgender girl. So Jane Doe, and according to the ACLU, she wanted to be a part of this and say, hey, I hang out with a lot of boys and my friends are all guys and I'm not super girly. So now that this new policy of only females get to be on the track team, which is not a new policy, obviously, it's just being challenged, that they might subject me to invasive tests. So this is going to hurt me and all the other cis girls on the team. So that's, I think, where this is coming from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So their argument here is, first of all, I don't think it holds water because biological males, trans women who are biological males, they're clearly defined as male. There is no ambiguity in terms of reproductive role there, and then the advantages that come from developing down that path through male puberty and things like that we talked about in the last myth. So there wouldn't, I don't see part of me does not see any problem with recognizing the difference that trans women are clearly biological males on the level of sex. And I don't think that would be a problem of definition here, but I do see somewhat of a point when it comes to sometimes really, really, really rare conditions of sex development, intersex conditions. There's an entire story about Castor Semenya, and so I can see where those edge cases might be controversial. But again, intersex conditions of sex development have nothing to do with trans.
Right.
And so here, I think allowing biological males onto female sports teams and competing there would be incredibly detrimental to women's rights and safety for fair competition. Mm-hmm. So there's a balance of rights here that is not being addressed at all. The rights of females are just being stampeded over by biological males who want to compete in their category, in the female category. I think I was thinking that also based on what Dr. Emma Hilton was discussing, that a good solution for this entire issue is the just opening of the male category. Just have the male category open to anyone, and then have the female category closed because of those sex differences.
Right. Right. I mean, that sounds like a good solution to me. I know that the counterpoint would probably be that is not affirming of the individual's gender identity. So that's sort of the counter argument that I've heard, but.
Yeah, that's where the conflict of rights occurs between a person's gender identity, their internal sense of self, and then their sex, and then how that impacts women's sports. And so I think because based on the data in the peer-reviewed studies and all that we know about sex differences in physiology and sports performance, that biological males just should not be able to compete in the female category, because then there would be no female category after that. Right. We would no longer be selecting from the best female athletes. We'd be selecting from male and female athletes. Even if you tried to organize it by weight class, it would still naturally basically segregate itself into male and female divisions.
Because, that's interesting.
Because even if you equalize male and female body weight, the sex difference is still huge. So for example, in weightlifting, if you have males and females from the same weight class, the males can lift 30% more than the females, even in that same weight class.
Yeah.
So that just shows you that the sex differences are so large that you cannot have an open female category.
Right. Okay, Good. Shall we move on to the next myth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Number 4.
Yeah. Fact 4. Trans people belong on the same teams as other students. Oh, good. This brings us back to what you just mentioned. So,
Mm-hmm.
myth: trans students need separate teams. Okay, that's not what you proposed. Trans people, like all people, may experience detrimental effects to their physical and emotional well-being when they are pushed out of affirming spaces and communities. Efforts to exclude subsets of girls from sports can undermine team unity, and youth derive the most benefits from athletics when they are exposed to caring environments where teammates are supported by each other and by coaches.
Last sentence is true. I mean, it's very true that, yeah, it's important that people have caring environments and are supported by each other and have good coaches, and emotional well-being is important.
It's also,
Again,
the sentence before it is also true too. If you're
right. Right. If you define girls as, yeah, as females, right? Yeah. But again, we go back to that conflict of someone's internal sense of self and then objective reality when it comes to sex and the bodily differences that can affect sports performance. And so I think it's very important that everyone is treated in a way that's respectful, in a way that is not abusive to anyone. And I think opening up that male category for trans women or anyone else to compete there would be the most beneficial overall for both women, females competing in the female category, and then everyone else. And I think it would solve the conflict of rights to a large degree. I think taking away the signifier, oh, this is a male category, like taking away that, just making it open, I think that would be more beneficial. And that way, you don't have to necessarily deny a trans person or a trans woman's experience. You can allow that category to be open in the male category, and not say, oh, you're a male, you have to compete here. Well, you're a trans woman who's a biological male, and so we're going to put you in the open category for the safety of females, for the safety and rights and fairness of females in the female sports category. Mm-hmm. So I think there is, there's some truth here, but I think the important thing is the balancing of rights, and you can still do that and not be detrimental to the emotional well-being of people. You can still balance those rights and not hurt people. I mean, it's a hard thing to balance, but again, the most important thing is the safety and fairness of the female sports category.
Right. They've the ACLU has sort of set it up that if a male student who identifies as trans cannot run on the girls' team, that amounts to being pushed out of an affirming space and community. So they've amped up this emotionality, this, like you said, we can agree with the idea of people not being pushed out of spaces and community and not being made to feel othered. But if we look at this next sentence, efforts to exclude subsets of girls from sports, it's like the ACLU has made or tried to make cis girls a subset of girls. And this will, by extension, exclude many of them from sports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in an effort to be inclusive, you wind up excluding and violating people's rights, which would be really unfortunate. And yeah, they're playing kind of this. They're being vague on purpose. They're not defining their terms very well, and then they're using the definition of gender identity as the marker for girls.
Right. Shall we move on to fact 5?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see.
Those were 4. We did the 4 myths.
4. And then at the end they said, say it with us. Trans people belong everywhere, including on sports teams. I agree that trans people do have the right to compete in sports. The argument is not that they should not have the right to compete in sports. The argument is that biological males, again, should not have the right to compete in the female category.
Right. Yeah, it's disingenuous phrasing, right? Because no one wants to disagree with this statement. So they've made it, I don't know what that's called in argument, when you, maybe you know what that's called, when you sort of like force an opinion on the other side that is not what we're trying to say.
Yeah, that would be a straw man, like just constructing your opponent's argument in a way where it's the worst possible or the least accurate version of their argument, so that you can easily deconstruct it and destroy it. The opposite of straw man is steel man, where you take a person's argument and you build it up to the strongest possible version it can be, and then you argue against that. And that's the correct way to go about it in terms of argument.
Right.
But yeah, they're doing every single one of those facts has a straw man. Yeah.
That is such a good point, and it makes me want to skim the facts again. So if they had done a steel man, like you said,
right,
these would have been entirely different facts or myths.
Right.
The myths would have been different, right? Because like myth number one, you're not saying that sex is identifiable through one singular biological characteristic, right?
Right, because we integrate all those variables, all those characteristics together, we can easily define sex. And they're also constructing a straw man in terms of detaching sex from reproductive role.
Yeah.
Because the argument is like, no one's arguing that, oh, chromosomes are the one characteristic that always defines sex. That's not the correct. Yeah. So that's a straw man too there.
Right. And then number two is a straw man, because the trans athletes' physiological characteristics provide an unfair advantage. They've not specified which sex they are, so you can't even begin with that one. And then number three, the participation of trans athletes hurts cis women. Again, they haven't specified. I would give them that one, but they haven't specified which sex the trans athletes are. So
yeah, the argument is just not. It's not clearly defined, and it's not precise.
Yeah.
So, and it opens it up for interpretation.
Right.
And it also plays on people's emotions too, as you can see, like especially at the end, or these last two facts, very emotional appeals, not backed up by a lot of evidence or any evidence in this thread.
And you would think and hope that lawyers would not be doing this, and they would be using specific and precise language.
It's shocking to see like this standard drop.
Yeah. And we haven't even mentioned the name Chase Strangio, because we don't have enough hours to cover Chase.
Oh man, yeah.
But maybe another time.
That's a whole nother story. Yeah. He shows up in the Teen Vogue video.
Yep.
And that's on the denial of biological sex video, and then I talked about him a little bit in the book too, just in that context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we can, if you want. I'd love to actually have you back, and we could maybe dissect some of Chase Strange.
Yeah, kind of deconstruct his points. And
yeah, that would be really good.
That'd be great.
So, all right. I mean, how do we close this out? I wanted to follow their link that they put in this. Say it with us. So now we all have to be chanting sycophantically, I guess.
I do agree. Trans people belong in sports. But we have to be very specific in the argument there. Yeah, right. So I just wanted to see what they had linked to. It's a petition, it looks like. Okay, yeah, they're talking about the dozens of states that have introduced bills that would ban girls who are trans from participating in girls' sports. Again, that wording, girls who are trans, it's very confusing for people who don't know. They would not know. Right, because they might, somebody might think that they're saying, oh, a biological female who identifies as trans. Yes. It's very confusing. Yeah. I think that they know that. I would venture that they know many people would think it means that. And they kind of want it to mean that. If you hear Chase, he'll say stuff like, women and girls who are trans are biological women and girls. That was a tweet from Chase. So it's purposefully obfuscating the underlying truth, and very, very confusing. Because it's like, wait, which sex are you talking about? Right. Yeah. And then here they repeat the emotional appeal. Trans people have a right to participate in sports consistent with who they are, just like anyone. Denying this right is pure discrimination. One thing that we keep hearing, and that was in the Vogue video, was the statement, people are who they say they are, and you are who you say you are. So that this emphasis on internal identity or internal perception over anything else. Yeah. Okay, so and then They said, yeah, denying that is pure discrimination.
Right. Right. So they're appealing to emotion and they continue to do so. Oh, wow. This paragraph, maybe we should talk about this paragraph because this is egregious. The marginalization of trans student athletes is rooted in the same kind of gender discrimination and stereotyping that has held back cisgender women athletes. Transgender girls are often told that they are not girls, and conversely, transgender boys are told they are not really boys, based on inaccurate stereotypes about biology, athleticism, and gender. As a result, yeah, go ahead.
There's truth to like the point that inaccurate stereotypes have been lumped on to males and females and excluded people for just having a different behavior or expression or psychology within their sex. But this is a whole nother realm because we're not just we're blurring the lines between the sexes now. We're saying, and they're saying that basically that being female and having a certain reproductive system counts as a stereotype of what a female is. Like they're basically saying that the ultimate definition of what a female is or what a male is a stereotype, and we should break down that. And yeah, it's this blurring of boundaries completely and blurring of categories.
Right. And then they say, I'm just skipping to the end of the paragraph. This exclusion contributes to the high rates of homelessness, suicidality, and violence that Black trans women and girls face. So it's like, how are you supposed to argue with that? You look like a monster.
Yeah, they'll if you disagree with that, they'll call you transphobic or bigot or and it's true that there is violence against Black trans women, but you have to look at the statistics and see what that actually is and the variables that go into that. So that there's again just no clarity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's sort of the bottom line, is that there is a lack of clarity and specificity. So we almost can't even check some of these. I guess before we did this, I thought it would be more straightforward. I thought it would be, I don't know. I think they've obfuscated it to such a degree that it's hard to actually argue.
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to Colin Wright's piece too. That will be, because it's also often in writing you can break it down in a more systematic way too and kind of really analyze it and spend time. So I think that's beneficial too. I might write about this in the future. Thread.
Yeah, that would be good. And then and trans student athletes are student athletes, period. Sort of another mantra.
Just reaffirming the circular argument, the unclear circular argument.
Right.
Oh man. I was shocked at how much depth there was to each of those, how far you can go, because there's just so much obfuscation.
Yeah. Just layers of obfuscation. And like you said, circularity, that was a good point to throw in. The end, circularity of these arguments, it's not what we should be seeing from lawyers.
Yeah, no, it is shocking. They do play on people's emotions all the time, so you have to be very careful that your emotions aren't being pulled. You have to analyze things objectively and still have compassion, but do it in an objective way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, Zach. Is there anything else that you want to add and throw in there?
I think that's it. Yeah, I'm really happy that you invited me on, and I think we had a great discussion. And I'm glad we went through the ACLU thread too and broke that down.
That was fun. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was really good to have you on. I do hope that you'll agree to come back sometime, because I think there's still a lot that we didn't get to talk about. So yeah, this was fantastic. And everyone listening, please go check out Zach's work. I will be linking his stuff in the description, and buy his book, The Gender Paradox.
Oh, and one last thing. I am working on a third book now, which is going to be about the sex spectrum. So it's going to go through every single major article that we see in social media being shared about the sex spectrum. And each chapter will be a rebuttal to each of those articles, like rebuttal to the sex redefined article from Nature, or rebuttal to Anne Fostow Sterling's how sexually dimorphic are we? So all these articles we see all the time, each chapter will be a rebuttal. So I'll be working on
That's
that.
so needed. And that sounds excellent. So I look forward to seeing that. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.